Chapter 9. Theron and the Red Scythians. I stood in the street, in front of the surgery with Abu and Melissa. We were all looking at the new sign, carved out of wood, and brightly painted with the symbol of the caduceus, the sign of the physician hanging from the pole jutting out just above the front door. The ancient symbol of two snakes, curved around a staff with wings, was an unmistakable signal to anyone who walked by that I was now practicing ancient medicine full-time. There was a never-ending stream of patients who had been coming to see me with every discernible ailment, from cuts and bruises to eye disorders, fevers, stomach issues, and broken limbs. You name it, I saw it. Many I was able to help, but some I could not. Several days each week, I spent doing my rounds at the military hospital. The streets were very crowded that day. There was an assortment of people going to and from the markets at the Emporium, groups of legionnaires patrolling the streets, vendors hawking their sweetmeats and hot beverages, cripples and blind people begging for alms, and a constant background hum of activity. I noticed some movement across the street between two stalls. There I saw a figure dressed in rags, crouching on his haunches, with a cup, holding it out and shaking a few coins in it to get the attention of people passing by. But there was something unusual about this beggar. His face was hidden in the darkness by his hooded shirt, but I noticed the long hooked nose, a scraggly bearded chin, and a dark shadow rearing up behind him. A chill ran down my spine. I had seen this person before. He was staring at me. I was looking at a dead man. It was Draco, without a doubt. The Chi Rho metal around my neck came alive and began to throb. I moved towards the beggar and started to cross the street. I was interrupted by a troop of cavalry parading. They blocked my advance, and only when they passed by, my way to cross was clear. The spot where I had thought I had seen Draco was now empty. The dark shadow had melted away, disintegrating into rivulets and disappearing into the crowds. I went there, but there was no sign of him. I went back and forth along the street, looking in the shadows amongst the nooks and crannies, but still could not find him. As I walked back down the street, returning to my surgery, I was met by a breathless Abu. "Kyrios, where have you been? I have been looking all over for you. We have visitors, and they are famous. They are waiting in your clinic. They were asking about you. You must come, quickly." "Sorry, Abu. I thought I saw somebody, or something. I am coming now." We walked quickly back to the surgery, where we were met by a rotund, shaggy, black-haired, and thickly bearded man, dressed in a lavish red silk kaftan. He was short, very stocky, with stout legs the size of tree trunks, jutting down from his silken tunic. He wore snakeskin boots and carried a walking stick topped with a very large red gemstone. His thick neck was draped with gold chains, and his wrists were cuffed with gold and bejeweled amulets. He wore large gold rings on each finger, set with rubies. A broad smile at our appearance revealed several gold teeth that glittered in the daylight. This extraordinary figure doffed his red silk hat and bowed deeply, announcing grandly, "Theron Simonides at your service," his hand and hat sweeping the floor as he bowed. What a showman, I thought. He was flanked by two very tall, red-haired, red-bearded, blue-eyed giants whom I took to be gladiators or warriors of some sort, very tall, standing erect, clutching javelins. They towered over Theron by at least 2 heads. They were clad in gold scale armor, red silk capes and trousers belted at the waist. Their heads were crowned with tall, pointed golden helmets with long red horsehair tassels dangling down to their waists. Each wore an embroidered scarlet silk caftan over their armor, with richly embroidered sleeves and cuffs. Long curved swords were slung from their belts. These fellows were fit and trim and ready for action. People passing in the street by the open door stopped and gazed quizzically at the extraordinary sight. Soon there was a crowd, and they pressed forward to the open door, curious and amazed at the sight of this colorful trio. "Aye, thank the gods," Theron exclaimed, clapping his thick, bejeweled hands together. "Is it Taish, or should I say Fortuna herself, that brought us together? We do indeed have a great need of your services." He stopped, reached under a fold of his caftan, and pulled out a bag of coins, which he held aloft. "And of course, I will pay handsomely for it." The crowd was getting noisy and began jostling each other, the back rows of bystanders standing on tiptoes, leaning forward, pressing on those in the front. I motioned towards my inner chambers, out of sight of the crowd on the street. "Abu, take our guests inside. Melissa, can you bring us some refreshment?" I looked at the crowd. It was growing bigger by the minute. Everyone in the neighborhood wanted to see the spectacle. I noticed, with growing concern, that the Cairo metal around my neck was beginning to tingle and then vibrate and grow warm. I looked more closely at the faces in the crowd, and then I saw that unmistakable one, half hid behind a filthy hooded cloak, poking through the crowd. I was sure it was him, and there was that shadow, seeping in amongst the crowd, growing ever darker and impenetrable around their feet. It was flowing like liquid tar, moving in rivulets through the crowd. I looked up again to get a fix on that hooked nose, the skull-like face, the scraggly beard, and the deep, beady eyes that shone with malice. He was there, staring at me. And then he wasn't. Search as I might, I lost sight of him again. He melted into the growing crowd. Theron Simonides stepped forward in a theatrical manner, clapping his hands together, the sounds echoing like a thunderclap, resounding through the room and immediately silencing the crowd outside. The shadows flowed away like rivulets into a black sea. The sound of his clap had barely stopped echoing when 6 more red-haired, red-bearded warriors of similar size, dressed in identical red silk caftans, worn over golden-scaled armor and helmeted in those strange pointed helms, now parted the crowd like Moses at the Red Sea. They marched into the doorway, turned and stood at attention, facing the crowd. Theron stepped through them, holding his hands up. "Now, good people, you have seen enough for today. I have business to conduct with the good physician here. Back to your homes and stores you go. But you must come back and see these magnificent Scythian warriors. these Massagetæ from the Asian steppes. But not here. Come to the Hippodrome in 7 days' time. There you will see them in the races. Now go." He clapped his hands again, and the 6 guards began to push the crowd back into the street, with the warriors forming a semicircle around the entrance. The crowd began to drift away. After a short time, the street was clear, and I could see across to the other side. There, sitting on a simple wooden stool, was Raphael of the Grey Eyes. He looked at me and smiled. I shouted for joy. "Raphael! Raphael! Wait!" But Theron was at my side. He was gazing where I was looking to. "Who are you talking to, physician?" he said. He was looking at me quizzically. "You called out to somebody, but there is no one there," he said. I looked back to the stall. The wooden stool was empty. Raphael was gone. "Forgive me," I said. "I thought I saw an old friend, whom I have dearly missed. I was mistaken." Turning back to Theron, I motioned him to the inner room. "Come, let us sit, and you can tell me how I can help you." Melissa had served up a plate of sweetmeats, oil, olives, cheeses, bread, and grapes, and poured a goblet of our best wine for our guests. Theron lounged back on the couch and stuffed his mouth full of grapes, which he chewed with great gusto. The 2 original guards again stood, one on each side of him, at attention, staring forward, impassive. "You were very good with the crowd," I said. "They are simple people, not used to seeing such, shall we say, unusual people like you and your companions, dressed in the way you are." I was beginning to worry that we were going to be overwhelmed by their curiosity. In between mouthfuls of grapes and olives, he managed to speak. "In my profession," he said, gesturing to his 2 companions, "you get used to the attention. It comes with being famous. It's all part of the show, you see. They will remember us. They will come to the races at the Legion in 7 days' time, and they will be thrilled. We will take their money, and we will be thrilled as well." He laughed heartily. "But it is always good to bring some muscle along for crowd control, no? But physician, enough of this small talk." He leaned forward, his lively dark eyes boring into me. He looked at me carefully up and down. "And I hear that you are the best money can buy. I have spoken to Rufus at the Serapeum. He recommends you. He says that you are different. He says you do not follow the path of these other so-called medicine men, those parasites who know nothing, pretend to know it all, take our money, and blame the gods when all goes wrong." "I will help, if I can." I picked up my stylus and wax tablet to make notes. "This person is a Scythian of the Massagetæ, from the steppes north and east of the Hyrcanian Sea, beyond the inhospitable sea, which you Romans call the Black Sea. She was a great princess, an heir to the throne, a great woman warrior amongst her people." He gestured to the 2 warriors standing on his right and left. "These 2 warriors are her brothers, Protothies and Scomaxa." Each of these fellows, in their turn, nodded their heads slightly as their name was mentioned. "The guards outside are also their kinsmen." "These lands you talk of, the steppes, they're very far away and are not known to me," I said. "Many years ago, I was a trader. I traveled with my father to the shores of the Black Sea, to the very eastern end, past the province of Laziacam, and into the kingdom of Liberia flanking Armenia. There are great mountains there, and it is the home of fearful giants. The peaks of these mountains touch the sky and are white with snow and ice, and many days' journey through high mountain passes, we come to the plains, by the shores of the Hyrcanian Sea. There begins the vast rolling seas of grass, the steppes, stretching countless leagues east to the deserts that border the land of the Quinn, the land of silk. This vast realm is the land of the Scythians, the horse lords. It is endless, like a great ocean, and the Massagetæ are the greatest and fiercest of the Scythians. But why go so far, and in such danger, I asked. What is it that you were after? Ah, my friend, everything. Silks, spices, gold, trade. You have no idea of the wealth of the East. We labored to establish trade routes for our caravans, and we had to make contact with those horse lords, the Massagetæ, the greatest horse warriors the world has ever seen. But what do these tales of yours and your travels have to do with me, a humble physician? And shouldn't we be going to see your princess if she is ill? Surely, physician, you would not insult a guest such as me, a storyteller, from telling my story? You must understand, physician, that all good wine must mature before it is consumed. So indulge me. Let me tell you the story my way, and you will see how we have all come to this great physician's home in the great city of Alexandria. Very well, Theron, do tell. I settled down on my divan and gave this showman all of my attention. Theron stood in the middle of the room. His eyes glittered in the flickering lamplight, his voice animated. I had to give him his due. He was good at this. I tell you, physician, as the gods are my witness, we have it all wrong about the people of the horse, whom we have called barbarians and Scythians. We are taught by our learned men, our philosophers and scribes, that beyond the lands that surround the Mare Nostrum, all else are barbarians. We have no idea, no concept. It is beyond our comprehension. If you see what I have seen, if you went as far as I have gone, over the grassy oceans far, far to the east, on the swiftest of horses that Poseidon himself placed in those distant lands, you would know just how big this earth is and how little we know of it. I have seen the fire mountains, past the inhospitable sea, past even the Hyrcanian Sea, through the land of the two great rivers, the river Oxus, and over vast steppes many months' ride on swift horses, to the Altai Mountains, and even beyond that, to the land of the Quinn, where there is another great empire. There I have been, and back again. And I tell you, physician, these horse lords are no barbarians. They do not live as we live. They are born to the saddle, men and women folk alike, from the youngest of ages. They have vast flocks of cattle, sheep, goats, and above all, horses. They wander the steppes, following the spring and autumn, fall and winter. All their wealth they carry with them, and their wealth is in their flocks, and in their vast herds of horses. They do not live in cities as we do. They do not grow crops, and even though they live not in cities, from time to time they do gather in large numbers, and then the plain becomes a vast sea of their tents, which they call yurts, made of felt, round and warm and safe from winter winds. These can be assembled and disassembled quickly in a few hours. Their leaders live in very large yurts, some of them very, very large, like a moving palace, mounted on enormous carts, pulled across the grasslands by teams of oxen. These traveling palaces are lavishly decorated with colorful carpets and tapestries and all manner of wealth. Born to the saddle, they seem half men and half horse. They are constantly at war with themselves or other empires at the border of their vast lands. They raid and they plunder. The way of these nomad horse warriors is a harsh one. They are trained to ride and fight. They ride all the time in all kinds of weather. They are hardy and resourceful. Each warrior has 3 to 5 horses, which are trained to move with them and to follow the tribes. They stage vast hunts over many leagues, using their horses and mounted warriors to draw all manner of game before them to a spot where they can be ambushed and slaughtered. And so they are fierce and ruthless in battle. They fight their battles like they herd their animals and conduct their hunts, attacking from multiple directions, retreating, drawing their enemies into traps. And above all else, they are the most deadly horse archers imaginable. Their horses are swift and their aim is true. They do not miss. They will hold their enemies at bay, circling, riding, shooting from the saddle, those deadly arrows at a gallop, until their enemy is worn down, to be finished off with lances and sword and cut down to the last man. They cut the heads off their enemies, and after displaying them to their chief warriors, they scalp them. The heads of their enemies they pile in heaps across the plain. The scalps they use to adorn their saddles, and some warriors have them woven into cloaks so as to boast their prowess. Theron, my friend, I said gently, I find this all very fascinating. But if you have come to me for help, if somebody is hurt and needs to be treated, we may be wasting precious time. Can you get to the point so I can understand what I need to do to help? When I said this, Theron's eyes blazed. In 3 steps he was onto me, grabbing me by the neck of my tunic and yanking me to my feet. He pulled me to him, his nose almost touching mine. Physician, you must listen to the tale first, I tell you. You must understand what is at stake. You must know the enormity of what has happened, and why you must not fail us, for to fail would be unthinkable. Will you now hear the rest of my story? Theron, I am not your slave. I do not react to threats. If you want my help, my skill, then you should let me go. Theron stopped. The fierce scowl on his face softened, and he let me go, and bowed his head. He sighed, stepped back, and found a seat. Beckoning for wine, he took a deep draught. Then he looked up at me. You must forgive me, physician. I am a showman, a teller of stories, a producer of spectacles. Sometimes the actor in me takes over, but in truth, I must finish my story before I ask for your aid. I resumed my seat, and Theron resumed his story, but this time without the dramatic flourishes. In his own way, he began to get to the point. As I said, my story begins with my father, and his father before him, and many generations before them, back to the time of Alexander, the great king of Macedon, the conqueror of the King of Kings, and ruler of all Persia, Egypt, and Asia from the Euxine Sea, east to the gates of Ceres, which you Romans called Syrica, the land of silk and the land of the Quin. My forefathers were from Cheronesus, on the north shore of the Euxine Sea. From there, their trading ships penetrated by river to the interior of Scythia and made contact with those peoples along the great rivers. We ventured to the end of that sea and then to the east, to Colchis, where Jason and the Argonauts found the Golden Fleece. From there, they established trading posts with the Scythians. When I was a boy, I went with my father to Colchis. From there, we befriended a tribe of the Scythians who trusted us as we were honest traders, never cheating them and taking care to trade fairly. They grew to trust us, and we grew to trust them. My father arranged a trip with a group of them, and they promised to take us to the land of the Massagetæ. For many months we rode with them on ox carts full of our trade goods, wine, gold, glass, and jewels. Our guides were well armed and knew the way. Over the high mountain passes we ascended and came down into the vast grassland seas. We traveled on these steppes for many, many days. My father at last made contact with the Massagetæ. My father brought them many gifts of gold, armor, and fine wines, and thus he was able to gain introduction to their great king, Bartatua. The king gave him a golden tablet, which was a safe conduct pass, so that he could travel through the vast steppe lands where the Massagetæ were sovereign. The further he traveled, far to the east, past the Altai Mountains to the land of the Quinn. There he was able to trade for silk cloth, more valuable than gold, and he brought them back, first giving to Bartatua his just proportion, in thanksgiving for his protection. My father brought wagon loads of this silken treasure back to Chernisis, and then by ship to Alexandria to sell in the marketplace. For 10 years it was so. My father and then my brother and I repeated these voyages. We grew rich, all under the great King Bartatua's protection. But on the last voyage, no more than 4 years ago, the fates turned on us. The Massagetæ were always at war with other tribes of Scythians and the Indoi, those people of the Indus River. Bartatua has many enemies, and the greatest and most dangerous of whom was his own brother, Artaxas. Artaxas lured Bartatua to a great feast at a great gathering of the Massagetæ. Bartatua was poisoned, while Bartatua lay unable to move, but able to see and hear all. Artaxas' men sprang upon their guests and slaughtered them all. Only 3 members of Bartatua's party escaped, his sons Prototheas and Scumaxa, whom you see before you, and there was one other. Among the Massagetæ, as with all Scythians, women are held in great esteem. They ride with their men and hunt in their hunts, and join them in battle against their foes. These maiden warriors may not wed until they have slain a foe in battle. And now to the point of my story. Bartatua had a daughter, Axia Panopleus. That is a great name amongst her people, and it means worthy of armor. She is a warrior renowned throughout her realm. During the bloody feast I spoke of, she and her 2 brothers cut their way through their murderers, who had intended to cut their throats. They fought fiercely through throngs of enemies, and took their father's lifeless body with them. They escaped and fled west, ever west, until at length they came to our trading post at Chalcis. We took them under our protection, and brought them here to Alexandria. Artaxas learned that these children of his great rival survived, and had fled to our protection. His fury knew no bounds. He revoked our safe conduct. He slaughtered our retainers. He confiscated our caverns, burned our trading posts, and he vowed to pursue them to the very gates of Chernisis. My family was ruined, but we do not regret extending our protection to these princes and their queen. But to support ourselves, to raise the funds necessary to assemble the horses, the warriors, and the means to seize back the kingdom of the nomads, we have had to change our means of doing business. I cast about for a method of raising fantastic sums of coinage to mount our proposed military exercise. Knowing that these Scythians are superb horse people, so much so that they are half horse and half humankind, I recruited them to be charioteers in the races for the Red faction. They have never lost a race, and the greatest of them, the greatest charioteer, was their queen Axia. With my showmanship, we have made them into a phenomenon, an unstoppable force. The blues, the greens, the whites, none of them can match these horsemen. We have gone from hippodrome to hippodrome across the empire, even to Rome itself. We have amassed a war chest, but on the eve of our greatest race, here in the Legion, where we have wagered much of our fortune, and we are finally at the point where we can complete our treasure to raise an army, our hopes have been dashed. Our greatest charioteer, Axia, lays gravely ill. You must come. You must use your skills and restore her. All depends upon it. An empire will be lost if you fail. Now Theron had lapsed back into his histrionics. He began to cry and babble, throwing his hands into the air, grabbing his hair and falling to the floor, as in a fit of grief. "Theron, my friend, I will do what I can, but I make no promises." I turned to Abu, who at all this time had been sitting cross-legged on the floor at my feet, his wide dark eyes taking it all in. "Abu, get me my kit, and make sure you leave those two little thieves, Atlas and Calliope, in their cage. We've had enough mischief from them lately." I turned to Theron and the two warrior companions. "Let's go." Theron quickly recovered his senses, jumped to his feet, and said, "I have a chariot waiting, physician. Prototheus and Scumaxa will ride beside us." "Good. You can finish your tale along the way, and tell me how she became sick." It was early evening, at dusk. As the day wound down, bustling crowds along the streets were melting away. Theron's chariot, with 4 black horses, clattered over the streets, horses galloping over the cobblestones, and the chariot skidding around corners as we hastened forward. I clutched the railings to avoid being thrown off. We arrived at Theron's lavish quarters and hurried to the inner chambers. There, on an elevated bed, lay the queen. It was an extraordinary sight. Around the bed were 6 women, whom I took to be priestesses of some sort. They walked around the raised bed in a circle. Each of them were dressed in long, flowing silk robes, which billowed out and trailed behind them as they moved, like angel wings, glimmering and flickering in the light of the massed oil lamps also arranged around the bed. 2 of these priestesses were playing a bowed stringed instrument, a type of fiddle that vibrated out a monotonous sound. Each of the priestesses were throat singing in deep, hypnotic notes as they circled around the prone figure on the bed. The tall walls of the high ceilings resonated with the deep tones of the throat singers. It was unearthly. The hairs on the back of my neck bristled, and a shiver ran down my spine, as if an invisible being was plucking my own strings. The arms and necks of each of these priestesses were heavily tattooed with imagery of leaping deer, panthers, lions, and other animals. Their faces were dyed half white, half red. Their heads were adorned with pointed headgear, their necks adorned with golden amulets, with exquisite images of leaping panthers pouncing on running stags with long antlers. Braided locks of black hair hanging down to their waists moved like horsetails as they moved rhythmically around the figure lying on the bed. This unworldly scene transported me to another time and place. Prototheus stepped forward and clapped his hands together once, like a thunderclap, and then held his arms straight out, palms outward, and moved them down to his side, as if he was parting a curtain. Immediately, the ethereal sound of the bowed fiddles and the throat singing stopped. The circling priestesses stood to attention, turned out towards us, and moved aside. I stepped forward to the prone figure on the bed and saw at once that she was in great distress. The woman on the bed was drenched in sweat. In the midst of a convulsion, her back arched, her head thrown back, her arms stiffly retracted, her fingers and hands curved in like claws, her face in a terrible grimace. It was as if a strange force had possessed her. Theron cried out, hands and gold-ringed fingers to his face. He began sobbing, falling to his knees. "All is lost!" he cried out, bowing forward until his forehead touched the floor. Prototheus and Scumaxa turned their heads upwards and began to howl like hounds at the moon. Another shiver ran down my spine. The priestesses fell to their knees and fell forward senseless, prostrate on the floor. Abu, who was beside me, began to whimper, He threw his arms around my legs. "Kyrios! Kyrios!" he began to repeat hypnotically. I grasped his hands and brought him to his feet in front of me. He looked up, wild-eyed and bewildered. "Abu, it is time to act. Watch and learn. Now fetch my kit and bring it here at once." I turned to Theron and said in a loud voice, to break the spell that had descended upon all in the room, "Theron, listen and answer me, for we do not have much time. How long has she been like this?" Theron stood up, faced me, his eyes wild. I have not seen her like this. This is new. She was ill. She was restless, unable to sleep. Her arms and legs twitched. She puked several times and was in a sweat, lying down when I just left before I came to you. I began very carefully examining the woman. The convulsions were lessening, and the arching of her back and the stiffness in her arms were subsiding. I inspected her hands, arms, feet, and legs. She was conscious and panting, but quiet. "Is she beyond help, physician? Is there an evil spirit that has possessed her?" "There's always hope, my friend. And there's no evil spirit here, I assure you, although someone with evil intent may be behind this." I reached into my kit and retrieved a long copper tube with a funnel, and a blue bottle of camphor, and a red bottle of almond water mixture. "I need a flask of clean water, and tell those priestesses we will need clean clothes and sponges and cold water in basins. Tell them to bathe her immediately. We need to get the fever down." I turned to Abu. "Take this bottle and mix half of the contents with the drinking water in the flask." I jumped up onto the bed, straddling the prone body, holding her head back. Slowly, carefully, I inserted the copper tube down her throat. Abu handed me the flask with the camphor and almond water mixture, and I slowly poured it down the tube. "Abu, in the kit, find me the black bottle of laudanum." After administering the camphor and almond water mixture, which I carefully measured off, I gingerly removed the tube and climbed down from the bed. I retrieved the crude syringe of my own construction from my kit, made with the needle of a sharpened hollow reed. I filled it with laudanum as best I could, and administered a dose of it into an artery in the arm of the panting Scythian queen. I turned to the company behind me. "Now we wait," I said, handing the syringe back to Abu. "Put this carefully back into its case." I turned to Theron. "If she doesn't puke up that mixture, and if she doesn't die from the dose of laudanum I gave her, we may have a chance." Now that I had some time to watch and consider things, I began to make notes on a wax tablet. I retrieved my quaint equivalent of a stethoscope of my own making, a hollow cylinder of wood with a funnel-shaped end. I placed it against the patient's chest and carefully listened to her heartbeat. I took her pulse, noting it all down. Theron and the Scythian queen's two brothers looked at each other and then at me quizzically, not comprehending what I was doing. In my notes, I had noted cyanosis, that is, the bluish discoloration of her skin. I noted the sweating, the seizure, the stiffness of her limbs, the shallow, rapid breathing. I had detected tachycardia, a rapid heartbeat, and noted the terrible grimace caused by the spasm of the facial muscles and the locked muscles of the jaw. I noted the opsthenosis, that is, the sudden dramatic spasm of the back muscles that caused the terrible arcing we had observed. "Tell me, physician," said Theron, "if there not be witches who brought this about, summoning evil spirits forth to inhabit this body, what else can be the cause?" I ran my hands over my forehead and through my hair to wipe away the sweat. "There are two possibilities. The first is that she has suffered a wound which has become infected with incredibly small organisms that have infected her bloodstream. You know this as a warrior's sickness. You might call it lockjaw or tetanus. But I looked again at the Scythian queen. She was asleep now. Her breathing was becoming more regular. Her pulse was slowing down. Another oscillation with my crude stethoscope indicated to me that her tachycardia was slowing down and she was resuming a regular heartbeat. I looked to her face. She was dangerously beautiful. High cheekbones, round face, curved aquiline nose, strong jawline, tattooed forehead with intricate drawings of leaping stags and pursuing panthers. These tattoos continued down her shoulders and arms. The sides of her torso were also adorned with these strange, mystical, animalistic tattoos, which continued down the thighs to the knees. She was young. I judged about 25 years old. Her hair was red like that of her brother's, and woven into intricate braids that reached down to her waist. She had an athletic, lithe, but powerful build. The priestesses were bathing her now, unbraiding and combing her hair, and sponging her with rose water. Long silken gowns, white like the priestesses, were brought forward, and she was covered. Scumaxa, who had now recovered his composure, stepped forward towards me and seized me by the arm with an iron grip with his left hand. In his right hand, he held a long dagger. He spoke a strange language that I had not heard before. It was neither Latin nor Greek nor any other language I had yet heard. He hissed his words as he spoke. Theron sprang forward and stood in front of me, grasping Scumaxa's trembling dagger hand. They spoke, the foreign words going quickly and earnestly back and forth between them. And of course, all this time wearing Raphael's sash, I could understand all of it. Scumaxa was insistent that I had to die, for no one who touched the queen but her husband could live. I had to die. Scumaxa? Prothesis? Theron? Whispered a voice behind us. Theron and Scumaxa stopped their argument mid-sentence. We all turned toward the voice. The priestesses had stopped their ministrations, and all knelt in unison, arms held aloft, and smiles of joy on their faces, for it was the Scythian queen who had spoken. She was awake. Her eyes were clear. She was still lying down, and a soft smile crept across her lips. She was speaking the language of her two brothers. Where have I been? I had an awful dream. A dream of coming through curtains of ice and fire that blocked my way. I saw light and followed it. That light led me to you. But she was not looking at Theron or her brothers. She was looking at me. Archangel Chronicles, copyright 2022 by Raymond, all rights reserved. Music: Ed Records, Legends. Alexander Vazinin, Danger. Epic Sounds, Mr. Pain by Lennon Hutton. Epic Sounds, Risen from the Ashes. Epic Sounds, Yuta Takta by Sayori Hayashi Egnell. Epic Sounds, Mystic Mountain by John Bajorek. Epic Sounds, March Across Ancient Land by John Abbott. Epic Sounds, Our Final Mission by Mo Levinson. Epic Sounds, Sad Business, Risen from the Ashes.